Are you curious about the world of offensive cybersecurity? We recorded this episode last year with Dwayne Laflotte, the CTO and Red Team leader at Pulsar Security. It was one of the most popular and enlightening episodes from last year, so I'm playing it again. I could listen to his stories all day. Make sure to pay close attention for when we start talking about backup systems and their role in a cyber attack. He confirmed my worst fears and then gave me new ones. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. You'll learn a lot, and I hope you'll enjoy listening to his stories as much as I do. By the way, if this is your first time listening, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years. Ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the giant database that we had just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me my Google Sheet consultant, Prasanna Malaiyandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good, Curtis. I have years and years of experience with Google Sheets. So
yeah, so we've been going through this, as of my recent purchase, 2 weeks now. As of yesterday, I now have my proud owner of a Tesla Model 3 base model, 270 miles of range. You have all these plans to choose from that offer different costs for different times of the day, right? I could potentially save a lot of money. I could potentially cost myself a lot of money. So I created this gigantic spreadsheet, and Prasanna's been helping me through it. What do you think? How do you think we are on the
I think your spreadsheet makes sense. I think it's not too... I'm actually surprised that no one has built an online calculator to do this.
It turns out, in my case, the break-even point was if I'm going to charge at least 80 kilowatt hours per week in my Tesla, then it makes sense to switch over.
Which is like 250, or it's like 350 miles, right?
Yeah, which is not going to be a problem based on my driving patterns.
Yeah.
There's a $16 a month thing to be on that plan.
But why do they charge you $16 a month? That's just highway robbery, you know?
I don't know.
It's not like anything really changes. You're still paying the transmission fees.
It's called a utility. It's called a monopoly. You can't just go get electricity somewhere else, right? Anyway, our guest, I'm sure, has got to be antsy at this point. Let's bring him on. Our guest today has specialized in offensive cybersecurity for over 20 years. He's the CTO and Red Team leader at Pulsar Security, which offers a comprehensive package of services designed to bring maximum security benefits at minimal cost without sacrificing quality. He's also a host of the Security This Week podcast. Welcome to the pod, Dwayne Laflotte.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. And I was itching at that electricity talk. All I'm saying is, how do they read how much electricity you use? They use that smart meter outside, right?
Yeah, the smart meter. Yeah,
and they drive by, and they pick up a 900 megahertz signal or a 2.4 gigahertz signal from that meter.
I'm just saying, I like where you're going.
If you were to saturate that band, you probably would be using no electricity. Just throwing it out there. And this is what my job is. How do we break these things where they just
So unfortunately, Dwayne, for me, so we have a smart meter too, but what our city has done is they've put basically Wi-Fi access points all throughout the city. And so you get free Wi-Fi anywhere in Santa Clara, which is great, but at the same time, they don't have to drive by anymore, and it just automatically connects to those and downloads the data.
The other thing that's interesting is your smart meter, it probably has a MAC address to connect into that particular thing. So if you D off your own smart meter, it will never connect to the Wi-Fi.
You would, of course, not suggest doing such things, but you're saying...
No, of course not.
That would be theoretically
irresponsible. Theoretically, from a network and red team standpoint, it might be what I would do.
if perchance you were doing a pen test for SDG&E.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So, Dwayne, for those that I think most people probably know about red team and blue team, but why don't you tell us what a red team is?
Isn't there a purple team?
There is, yeah. Purple's kind of the new thing. It used to be they would just pit the teams against each other. So, blue team is defense, right? It's the guys who really like reading through logs and looking for bad guys. The red team, we're the offensive team, so we like pretending to be the bad guys, and thinking all of the how could I get my smart meter off of the electric grid thoughts, and then putting those in action, and attacking an organization. And that involves everything from, because a lot of people throw around terms like pen testing or vulnerability scanning or red teaming. And those are three very different things. From the red teaming side, it's holistically looking at the company. So it's everything from the employees to what sites they view, from the company to who are your partners as a company that we could use to maybe leverage to get into the organization. We've had teams. The reason I talk about jamming sensors and whatnot, we actually do have teams that will physically break into organizations. And I can tell you that all the motion sensors on most alarms are 900 megahertz, and I can saturate that and walk through a building without a motion sensor going off. So there's like all sorts of really cool things that we as a red team will be trained to do. It looks very much like thievery, but we're the good guys, I promise. So that's our job. And purple is the mix, right? It's people who know a little bit of that offensive and a little bit of defensive, just to be better on both sides.
So would another term for that be ethical hacking?
Yes. Yeah. Ethical hacking is definitely another term people use for that. People have moved away from ethical hacking a little bit more to more focused terms because cybersecurity is so big at this point. It used to be like if you were in cyber, you kind of did the same thing. You looked a little bit at, offensive, you did a little bit of coding, you did a little bit of whatever. And that ethical hacker is really that generalist. And then you move into like the really focused sides of even offensive cybersecurity. Like if we just talk about offensive, I have people on my team who are reverse engineers. So what they will do is tear apart a system. There's one company, we broke into the company through a TV that was sitting in their lobby that was connected to the Wi-Fi. So how did we do that? We literally bought one of the TVs, tore it apart, attached a bus pirate and a JTAGulator to the system, ripped the firmware off the chips, and read through the firmware and found an exploit, and then used that to break into the TV. That's a specialty in and of itself. Then you have, your web developers who are really good offensive, web certified experts who know how to tear apart things like Angular and .NET and understand how all that works, but wouldn't necessarily be your reverse engineers and wouldn't necessarily be your network guys who are offensive network who understand, spanning trees and how I can manipulate a network and how MDNS works and like how to break all that, who are entirely different from the guys who are cloud. Like how to manipulate pulling universal keys from the cloud and how to get how to get two clouds to attack each other because they're never going to block each other. Like that's all tactics as well. So it's definitely like been specialized since the ethical hacking term came out.
That is like my mind is just like blown just hearing what you just talked about because that covers such a broad spectrum, right? And I wonder when people think about defending themselves from hackers, right? Are they sort of pigeonholing themselves? Because I know, Curtis, we've always talked about, okay, make sure you prevent lateral movement, make sure that you have multi-factor authentication, right? All the rest of these things. But there's, like you were saying, Dwayne, there's other ways, like through partners, through like that TV, right? Yeah. You didn't even think about that as an IT person, maybe. And you're like, it's just a TV, whatever.
Right.
Of course, I would... Tell me, Dwayne. Tell me I'm wrong, and it's totally okay because this is not my bag. The problem, the mistake that company made was that this smart TV, this network-based TV, was on the same network that the rest of their corporation was on.
Yes. Yeah. So part of it, absolutely. This particular customer, it was on the same network. But what we have seen before is a guest network, right? Isolated, no devices, and then we'll see people connected to the guest network who are also connected to the executive, to the internal network. And the reason they do that is because In the lobby, they don't get the corporate network. So they're like, oh, well, the guest network's here, so I'll connect to it. So what's really nice is once they connect to it, like when they leave the building, we can emulate the guest network. They'll connect to us. We'll drop a piece of malware or a capture portal or whatnot on their device. When they walk it back into the building, that portal will then beacon out to us, and now we have access to the corporate network. So, we definitely see, even though you isolate it, you can't pull the humans out of the system, unfortunately, for the most part. Yeah.
So if we could just get rid of all those damn users, our computer system would be a lot
easy.
Yeah, a lot safer. Absolutely. Yeah. Goodness gracious. Yeah, when I talk to somebody like you, I've had a handful of conversations with folks on the offensive side throughout my career, and I always walk away just super depressed. I'm just like why even try?
Yeah.
Did you have that story, Curtis, about the guy with the various uniforms who would break into buildings?
Oh yeah, I mean So I know a guy that does physical pen testing, right? And his job is to physically get into a place that he's not allowed to be, take a selfie, and GTFO, right? And and he just he just told me, he's like, I have never not been able to get into where I was supposed to get into. Right.
Yeah.
It's all about social engineering, and
it is.
Sometimes it's about card scanning, right? Scanning somebody's RFID badges, right?
Yeah.
I heard a talk. It was Kevin Mitnick once talking about the scanning badges in a bathroom, which it was just wrong, but it was it was just like, it's just so easy,
weird.
Right? You're just a little weird.
Yeah.
When I think back, the only like red team type stuff that I've seen depicted a lot, or like an entire movie based around it, was Sneakers.
Yes.
Do you remember that movie?
Oh my God, fantastic movie, Sneakers.
Yeah.
And what's funny about that is that's not far off. So, looking from my red team's, as the red team leader, I'm playing Robert Redford's job, right? So I'm going through and understanding, like, okay, cool, we got this target. How do we attack it? And I have my specialists. I have my mother who understands, sensors and understands, different wavelengths and signals and that sort of stuff. And I have my my face guy who's good at talking to people and that sort of thing. So I'm planning this out. I'm like, okay, here's how we're going to attack. Here's how we're going to do whatever we do. But looking at Sneakers from my perspective, my job,
right.
You go, okay, cool. Well, they got access to the temperature control system. Is that even possible? And sure enough, about a month ago, we were pen testing a bank. I like to call it the bank job. We were doing the bank job, and as we were doing the bank job, this is about a month ago. So it was in May, early May, cold up here, coldish at night. We did, sure enough, get access to the HVAC system. And what could we have done with it? We were like, okay, we could shut it off. And it gets cold enough at night where maybe pipes freeze and burst and that sort of stuff. We could crank it up, I guess. But then, I started thinking about Sneakers. I was like, oh my gosh. So if they're using infrared and we could crank it up, we could get in the bill. But yeah, so it's, it's entirely, as you go back and look at that movie, it was impressive how much stuff they got right from, what you might do as a red teamer is very cool.
Have you seen this movie?
I don't think I have.
I think they get a lot of stuff interestingly right.
Yes.
I mean, just the whole thing of like the scene where Robert Redford's got a bunch of packages, he's got balloons, and he's like, "Can you just buzz me through?"
Yeah.
So what you're telling me, Dwayne, is you play the role of the devastatingly handsome disarming guy who disarms.
That's
people.
what I like to. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't going to put that label on it, but thank you. Yes. But honestly, it's a great movie to watch. I love watching these movies because they're part of it's the passion of cybersecurity and hacking that I got in the 90s, right? And I watched Hackers, and I watched Sneakers, and I watched War Games, and it was that that awe of how could you tear a system apart? How could you make it do things that it was never even designed to do, and bend it to your will as a red teamer? And that's what these movies and these shows do for me, is they bring that awe back, right? Even though some of it might not technically be true, it doesn't matter.
So, given that you do offensive security, right, red teaming, and I know we'll talk more about that, I guess the question is, in your personal life, doesn't it freak you out a bit? Like, what do you do to protect yourself against some of those things, you know? Like, the fact that you're surrounded by this all the time, trying to break things, does that sort of translate into your personal life, where you're like, okay, RFIDs can be hacked, so I'm going to get one of those wallets that block RFIDs all the time, right?
So that's
Wi-Fi network, I'm just going to keep
question.
everything unplugged all the time. Like, nothing comes on my network.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question, and I also have I have probably 3 of the worst end users from a cybersecurity standpoint you could imagine. I have 3 children, and they're
Nice.
like you can never tell them what to visit or not visit, or click on or not click on. It's just, it is what it is. So so it's interesting. It's twofold. One, yes, there are certain things I take into account in my daily life that I notice a lot of people don't. Like, I use a password manager all the time for all my passwords. Because, using this spreadsheet, if the spreadsheet gets compromised in some way, somebody gets it. I'd rather have a company who focuses on managing passwords. And sometimes they do it wrong, right? Like KeepPass. But more often than not, they're going to get it right. So there are little things like that where I get paranoid and I go, yes, I want to do that. I turn on 2FA for everything. I have all of my account and credit locked through the 3 different, providers of credit, Equifax and all those guys, Experian and whoever else. So there are certain things I do because I'm a cybersecurity professional, and I can see, we have access to all the deep, dark web information on all the people, and I'm like, oh my God, I can see all this info. But from another standpoint, I worry less because I know how hard it is to break into a smart device. Like, I know how hard it is to reverse engineer a chip and figure out a way to break into it. So from that standpoint, if I just, I'm going to set a strong password on my Wi-Fi. Like, we have a crack cluster at the office that has, at this point, I think it has 40 or 50 3090 GPUs in it. So, and talk about electricity. Woo.
Yeah. You might consider moving that to Prasanna's neighborhood.
I might have to. I think I'm going to have to. So we can guess about, if we grab a hash from a password. So just a little bit if your users aren't breaking into wireless networks all the time. If I go up to a wireless network, I can see all of the clients that are connected because it's all over 2.4 gigahertz wireless. Everybody can see those signals. They're open, but they're encrypted between the client and the access point. But I can tell the client to get off the access point. I can de-auth it. I can say, hey, I'm the access point. Get off the access point just for a couple minutes, and it'll de-auth that client. And then the client, when they reconnect, will see a handshake, right? And that handshake's an encrypted password, but we can take that and then we can try and crack it. So I can then take that handshake, take seconds to get, I can pull it on my offline cracker, and our offline cracking device can guess 3 billion passwords a second.
Wow.
3 billion. Wow. So you say to yourself, well, okay, shoot, my wireless is probably not secure. But if you start looking at the math of it, you say, listen, if your password for your wireless is in any list of passwords ever, right? So if you go to haveibeenpwned.com, right, and you type in your wireless password and click check, and it's in the list, they can get it in seconds. But let's say it doesn't show up on that in any list. Now it's a mathematics problem to brute forcing. So let's say minimum password's 8 characters, and I can do that in, let's say, a day. And that's actually quicker than that. It's about an hour for me to do an 8-character, all uppers, lowers, numbers, whatever. If you put 9 characters on that, and let's say we don't do all uppers, we don't do all special characters, we don't do all numbers, that's still 26 times an hour. So we're looking at a day. Now we do a 10-character password. It's 26 days. We do an 11-character password, right? Now we're ending up at 26 months. We're at 2 years for us to break that, and that was just all lowercase characters. So the longer that password is, as long as it's not in a list, I personally know how hard it would be to crack. So I'm like, we got a 15-character password. It's reasonably good. Some uppers and lowers. Nobody's going to crack it. It's just not going to happen. So it's a great question because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh. And for me, I calm down on certain things, but other things I do reasonable stuff. My family, however, like my wife, like she will get valid emails from family members. She's like, I'm not clicking on that. No, I know. I hear all the dark stories. I'm not clicking on anything. Like if she gets a phone call from someone, she's like, nope. And I'm like, I think that was our bank. She's like, so yeah, I think my family takes the brunt of it.
My favorite thing, and it was a different bank that I'm at right now, but they would call for, basically it was a fraud alert, right? That I would have a potentially fraudulent charge, and then they would call me. They call me from rando number, right?
Yes.
And even if it said different number, I wouldn't believe it. But they call me and they're like, "This is ABC Bank. We'd like to talk to you about a potentially fraudulent charge. Please authenticate yourself." And they want me to you called me, right?
Exactly.
And they're like, this is the process. Like, you want me to give you, like, they wanted like my social or something for me to authenticate you called me. You don't understand how stupid this is. Like, I was so angry. I was
my gosh.
I'm glad you called me for a fraud alert, but I'll tell you what, I'll call you. Right, I will call the known number for the bank, and then I will authenticate myself. I'm not giving my social to some rando who just showed up on a phone number. Like, what are you thinking?
And I think what the worst part of that, you're savvy in the security world, so you're like, okay, this doesn't feel right. But I think the worst part is the bank is training their normal, customers that this is the normal process, right? We're going to call you. So when they get a call from a spammer, they're like, oh, well, this is the normal process.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like they used to train to click on links and emails, right? So
just like years ago when I worked at a bank, we would train. Everybody got regular cybersecurity training, and one of the things that we told them was, no one in IT will ever, ever, ever call you and ask you for your password. Ever, right? And then the next day after training, someone from IT would call them and ask them for their password. And it worked like 20% of the time.
Yeah, and they'd always give it. They're like, oh, they're from IT, of course.
Yeah, they're from IT. We're like, oh,
but what can you do, though, to train users, though? I think that's like the hardest challenge, right? Or one of the biggest challenges, right?
So I think it is, and I think it's not. I think in some ways we've been trained as people to stop listening to that voice in your head that says this is weird. So I like to think of humans as almost like networks, because I understand networks and they kind of make sense. So imagine you're a network and you have this intrusion detection in your head. And there are certain times we've all gone through this, where we're on the phone, somebody asks us a question, we answer it. Then they ask another question, we go, wait, this is weird. Like, I've never been asked this question over the phone before. Nobody's ever asked me for my social. Nobody's asked me what the last 4 digits on my credit card. Like, no. But then we go, oh, well, this, I want to be nice. I want to be polite. I'm not going to, right? So we get to that where we just disregard all the alarms we have in our head, because we're like, well, I'm on with this person and they must be well-meaning. And I think we need to get back to listening to those voices in your head. There's, what, this doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't. If it's not something you normally do, if IT calls you up every day and asks for your password, great. I get it. Yeah, you give them the password and no harm, no fault on yours. But if they've never called you up and then they call you up, like, that's weird, even if it really is IT. So, I wouldn't. Yeah, I think that's how I like to train users, is like really listen to that voice in your head. If it's something you've never done before, don't start now, right? Find other ways to verify.
But then how do you train them, taking that and the flip side of that, right? How do you train them to start doing things then? Because if they've never done it before, then how do you start to build that voice in their head?
Yeah, so that's a good question too. What I typically do then is say, listen, when that voice goes off in your head, and you're like, this is odd, this isn't the right thing, what you need to do is start thinking about alternate paths, alternate communication paths. So like Curtis had said, when the bank called him, he said, this is weird, I'm out. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to look on the back of my credit card. I'm going to find that number that's on the back of my credit card, and I'm going to call you back. Now, would that be fail-safe 100% of the time? Listen, if you're getting attacked by a nation state, they would have tapped into the phones and it wouldn't have mattered, right? So we got to assume a nation state's not coming after each of us, because at that point, we're kind of in trouble anyways. But if it was a random spammer, yeah, you verified via an alternate channel. So that's typically what I'll do is say, listen, if something's weird, get out of that particular thing, whether it's an email, whether it's text messages, whether it's a phone call, just get out of that and find an alternate way to communicate. Now, I say alternate way, and I stress that because we had a customer that unfortunately lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a scam. And their boss sent them an email saying, hey, we need to change our ACH. That should have been a red flag. How often do you change your ACH for bank-to-bank transfers for a particular vendor? And we said, and that person then said, listen, I verified. I did what you told me to do. I verified to make sure that this was right. And we said, okay, cool. What alternate channel did you use? And they said, well, I sent an email to my boss asking, if this was a real transaction. We're like, but didn't your boss communicate over email? And they were like, yeah. And we're like, that's not an alternate path. That you used the same path. So what had happened is the hacker actually, and because a lot of us would notice a fake Gmail account saying it's your boss. Right. This particular boss, their email got compromised. So they were in their inbox. So it's like, no, there's nothing you different path. Call them, talk to them face to face, especially when we're starting to talk with big money, right?
Yeah.
That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I've seen and heard of that. And I've seen it and heard of it where basically they have hacked the entire email system.
Yes.
And then customers are using email as their MFA, right? And so they basically, and they use that to basically at that point they've taken over, right? They can do whatever they want. They can reset passwords. They can then authenticate that with the MFA, which is why email and SMS suck as MFAs. And
right.
And speaking of which, recently in the last few years, right? I've been pushing more MFA on myself as well, which includes pushing it on my wife. And there's a lot of things that she doesn't do very often. And then I remember a couple of weeks ago where she went to go log on to something and she got angry. She says, oh, crap. That's right. I got to go get that thing, right? I got to go get the MFA thing to get the thing to put in the thing. And I remember getting angry at that moment going, yeah, who cares about having security? I'm sorry that you got to spend an extra 30 seconds to protect all the money we have in that account. Right. Anyway. I digress.
I remember that. I actually remember that conversation, Curtis.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Dwayne. So I like the password manager. We're a big fan of those here.
Good.
We've also covered the big LastPass hack, and it just it sounded bad. It got worse, and it just never got better. And so no one password manager is perfect. And if something becomes compromised, it's time to move. But that doesn't mean the concept of password managers is wrong. And tell me something that's better. That's what I want to know, right? Because, you talk about password length. I've just been over, because I have a ridiculous number of passwords in my password manager.
Yes.
I keep setting them to 20. 20 has been my number, right? And by the way, while you were talking about it earlier, I counted the number of characters in my Wi-Fi password is 18, so I felt better.
Oh, so you're good. You're good. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, and I've been pwned. I am good. Definitely. I've definitely had some accounts that got hacked or whatever, but who hasn't? So besides password manager and MFA, patch management, what would you think are the next sort of best bang for the buck that, and again, let's just do context. What our audience is typically really worried about is the ransomware hacks and exfiltration of that data, which what we're hearing is that exfiltration is now step one of a coordinated attack, right? So that's why we talk a lot about lateral movement, right? Trying to limit lateral movement. What would you say are the next few things that would stop a guy like you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here I'll spill some of the secrets from our red team tactics. And sadly, I'd say all of these are going to distill down to policy. That's it. It's going to be, here are the policies you should be following to make yourself more secure. So exfil is always one of the big things that a lot of our customers are concerned with as well, especially when we're doing banks, financial organizations, embassies, that sort of stuff. Anything we can exfil is important. And that's why there's this massive DLP market out there, right? Looking for exfiltration of data. Did it go over email? Is somebody trying to upload a file to a website? Something along those lines. I can tell you the red teamers as well as the hackers out there are not uploading data over port 80. They're not uploading data over port 443. They're not using the standard channels because there are so many other ways for us to exfil data out of an organization. So for example, the first thing we do when we break into a company and we
can I sorry to interrupt you, but can I ask you a question there?
Sure.
Why not? Because if they were uploading over that port, it would seem like it would be a lot easier to do.
It's absolutely a lot easier to do, but it's too watched. So everybody knows to watch all the web traffic.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So even if I were to break up what I'm exfilling into small parts and then like turn it into hex and then try and post it to a website, a lot of your DLP solutions are looking at the reputation of the website I'm posting to, right? And they start doing that analytics of that communications chain. And HTML communications, HTTP communications are very well understood. So it's easy for a corporate organization to go, well, we're not going to allow anything out other than through this proxy, and we're going to then man in the middle with a certificate so we can see all that traffic. So it's risky for somebody who wants to break into a company and steal data to go over those ports. They just won't anymore. It just doesn't make sense. And that is, it's like we're sitting out in a field. Right. And port 80 is this steel door in the middle of the field. And we go, well, we could go through that steel door or we could walk around the side of it and not use the steel door. Right. So for us, we're like, it's just easier not to use the steel door. For example, I'm guessing at least your home networks, but probably your corporate networks, you don't block traffic out. Most people don't. They block traffic in. Right. And then for DLP solutions, they look at web traffic. They look at, maybe even they look at, other ancillary traffic, but most of the time not, like web sockets and that sort of stuff. But most of the time they don't. So when we get into an organization, I mean, one of the first things we do, have you guys ever, you take a file, I assume you've used Windows in the past. We use Linux a lot, but take a file, right click on it, drag it to your desktop and create a shortcut, right? Pretty simple. And then you double click on it and it opens up the shortcut. Well, what if that shortcut reached out to a file server, right? Well, you could do that. You could grab a file off a file server and create a shortcut. When you double click on it, it opens up the file on the file server. Well, what if that file server was on the internet? Can you do that? Well, you can. Yeah, 445, which is SMB traffic, does travel out over the internet.
Oh.
Most people don't ever do it. So it's easy for us to, what we do is we'll go to AWS, spin up a server, turn on 445 and responder in a listener. And then we drop this shortcut at the customer site. And then we just wait. And what happens is everybody who browses that share doesn't even touch the file, but browses the share. Your file explorer wants to put an icon on every file. So when it does, it touches that file and it goes to figure out what type of file it is. So it reaches out to us and gives us your hash, your handshake for the network because it assumes it's connecting to. But who would stop SMB traffic going out over the internet, right? So this is one of the tactics we'll use. So then, we were working with certain organizations where they're like, we have DLP, we have blah, 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 we have all this other good stuff. And literally all we had to do to exfil the data was map a Windows drive out to the internet and copy the data from one server to another. And it just copied with Windows Copy. And they're like, yeah, we didn't see 10 gig worth of data, customer data, just go out over SMB because nobody's watching it. So this is where I say a lot of it comes down to process. It's, least privilege process on traffic going out of the organization. If it's not a port that you need, shut it down. 445 should never go out to the internet, ever. There's no reason for it. A lot of your home routers will actually block it by default, but corporate, no, they're okay with it, which is just weird. So I'd say part of that is process. Least privileges on the way out. If you don't need a port, lock it down. That's going to shut down a lot of the exfil tactics that we would use. There are still some exfil tactics that we will use that would be hard for you to shut down. There was one, I can't remember, there was one system. We had an administrator, we got access to this box, and he said, listen, I'll give you a jump station, because most of our engineers work on a jump station. And he gave us this jump station, and God bless him, he really wanted to get the gold star on the pen test. And the jump station had access to nothing. Like, it didn't even have access to the internet. Like, when we connected to it over remote desktop, this thing couldn't open files, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. We're like, okay, what do people use this for, honestly? And he's like, we may have applications on there at some point. It's like, okay. So it was completely locked down. And the way we were able to get our tools in and on that box was through DNS.
I was going to ask about DNS, yeah.
Yeah. And listen, this thing couldn't communicate with the internet, but it's on a Windows domain. So we would then request through the domain controller to go out to our hacker.com website, and it couldn't pull down files. This is DNS. But you can request text records, which is the associated data with the DNS record. So we would encode like the first 64 bytes of a file in hex, pull that down, and once we had all the hex bits, we reassembled it into an executable at the local station. So, and it works both ways. You got exfil and infill that way. So there are some that are really hard to block. You'd have to have very specialized tools watching for those types of infill, exfil. But I say just start with the basics. Shut down the ports that are going out that you don't absolutely need, and it gives you a lot less to look at. Like, did we have 100,000 DNS requests yesterday, and now we have 2.5 million? That's probably weird. We probably should look at that, right? It'll give you less of a surface of attack.
It was interesting because I had a conversation with a cyber person, and he was crapping all over the idea of using DNS as an attack surface. It's just nobody does that, and I'm like, okay.
In a totally locked down environment, I'll tell you, it's a pain in the butt because it's slow. Think like if you guys ever used a 14.4 modem back in the 1990s, it's like that, where you're like, okay, DIR from our side, and it's like, so from nostalgia standpoint, it's pretty cool. But so yeah, I get that. It's not the best channel, but if it's the only one available, yeah, we'll absolutely use it.
Right. Interesting. Man, I could talk to you all day. It's both very interesting and exciting and super depressing. Yeah. Because we talked to somebody yesterday, and basically their point, I would summarize it as this: don't spend all your time trying to stop this stuff. Learn how to detect it when it's happening, and learn how to respond when it has happened. Right.
Yep.
Learn how to watch for exfil, but in your case, you're saying that some of this stuff is going to be nearly impossible to detect. Look, stop. I think what you're saying is stop the really obvious stuff.
Yes.
Right. You can watch the port 80. Right. But you're saying that nobody's going to. So because I had heard that they're still using like these, and their names are escaping me, but like these file sharing sites.
Yes.
Like mega file,
like mega uploads and mega download.
Like that, they were still using mega those. File, and wouldn't those go over port 80?
Yeah, and they do, and that's why most people aren't using those anymore. Like it used to be, what was it, Pastebin and that sort of stuff. Like people were finding these sites where you could paste up a lot of data, and the problem is DLP solutions really have caught on to those. And I can tell you, as a developer. And as a guy who's trained in writing viruses that bypass any antivirus on the planet, it's really not that hard to open up any other port and start transferring data because nobody's looking for it at that point, right? And even silly things like, SSH. Okay, so if ever you've ever gone on a Linux box or whatever and you want to connect to it remotely, use SSH, which is a secure tunnel. Well. It's a secure tunnel because it's encrypted. So if I just SSH and SCP copy a file to a remote Linux box, that's an entirely encrypted channel. Nobody's going to see what's in that. So why are you not blocking like port 22 out? right? Oh, well, one of our developers said they need to connect to some remote, Linux box in AWS. Like, okay, well, there's better ways to do that, right? So yeah, you'll start to see a lot of, and you'll start to see a lot of these people using things like, even like so a lot of the Cobalt beacons, Cobalt Strike beacons, and that sort of stuff are starting to use different ports just so that they're not detectable, because everybody's looking for 80 and 443, right? So, and it's just easy to use something else.
So my summary of what I heard all over that is blocking outgoing ports that you don't need, right? Disallow
100%.
all and allow the ones that you know you need. You'll break a couple of things, I'm guessing, right?
Yep.
You'll break a couple of things in the beginning, you'll fix those things, and then you'll be better.
But isn't that sort of supposed to be the way you approach network firewalls?
Yes.
Right? It's always a deny all, and you add access for what you need.
But I think Dwayne's making a very valid point that people haven't historically done that going out.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and it's weird because and it's the same thing with Windows, right? Windows initially started with everything's open and you need to lock it down. And that's why they got the bad rep of being the unsecure operating system. And Linux started the entire opposite. There's nothing running on it unless you open it up. Networking has always been trust the inside, not the outside. Right. So we've been trained to, if they're on the inside, they already have access to the jewel. So who cares? We don't need to worry about them going out. But the problem is, especially with ransomware and whatnot, the going out part is the important part at this point. So yeah, you absolutely want it. And I like to think of it as a least privilege network stack. Right. So exactly what you're talking about is what privileges do you need going out? And let's say we manage a $22 billion organization. Yeah, you're not going to set everything to deny out and then open it up. But what you could do is you probably have pretty sophisticated firewalls. You set them in monitoring mode. And at the end of a month, you see what ports are in use. Maybe you allow those and everything else gets blocked. Right? So there are ways to do this without sort of breaking the organization. But I'll tell you, the same thing applies to corporate resources. We see far too often where we're in an organization and it's like, oh, here's a public share that everybody has access to. And oh, by the way, it's got, we've seen things like social security numbers. We've seen applications for mortgages. We've seen HR files. And we're like, why do we with no account have access to these things? And they're like, I don't know. People just put them in the public share. It's easy for anybody to access it. So least privilege needs to be used everywhere. But
that's your policy thing that you were talking about.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
The concept of least privilege. Yeah.
Yep.
That is a really good concept and policy that people should have everywhere. Let me ask you this. So a company comes to you and they're like, hack us or whatever. I don't know exactly what they say, but what do they say and what do they get out of it? Right?
Yes.
When they walk away from having been summarily beaten and shamed, what do they get out of it at that point?
That's another good question. So we do the way we do red team engagement is a little bit different than most cybersecurity companies. So the heart of our organization is very much a training company. I was a Microsoft certified trainer for decades. My CEO was also a certified trainer for decades. So we're all about teaching as much as we possibly can. So we bring that into our red team engagement. So the way it starts is typically people do come to us and say, hey, listen, we're not really sure what our cybersecurity posture is. Can you test it? Right? Can you hack us? And we'll get some information from them. We'll obviously get the T's and C's sign that says you can't throw us in jail and all that other good stuff. Because we have had people come up to us. We had one guy come up to us say, I'd like to engage you to hack into this bank. I'm their IT manager. And we're like, okay, cool. But we don't see that you're their IT manager on LinkedIn or anything along those lines. He's like, no, it's okay. It's fine. But all things will go through me. And I was like, okay, so we can't talk to the bank and you want us to... No, we're not doing that until we talk to somebody at the bank. But for the most part, they come to us, say, hack us. Here's the resources. Ideally, they say, here's our IP addresses that are valid to hit. Go nuts. Sometimes they kind of tunnel us into, I only want you to focus on these systems, but they get kind of a better risk assessment if it's let us look at everything. And then what we typically do is we'll literally open up a Zoom meeting from 9 in the morning till usually 2 in the morning, where their blue team can join and watch what we do, and we'll talk them through it. But like, I know, and it feels weird. It's like, hey, I'm beating up your child, but let me explain how I'm doing it. And they have to sit there and watch. I guess that makes it awkward.
Let me explain why your child is ugly.
Right, exactly, and we'll show you empirical proof. So, what's nice about that is it's more collaborative. It's not like I'm delivering a report at the end, and the blue teamers are like, "Well, those red team guys suck," right? It's hey, we want to work with you. We want you to know these tactics and watch how we're moving around the network. And B, what we typically see from the blue team is they'll go, "Hey guys, you know that system over there you haven't looked at yet? Yeah, it's been causing us troubles. We wouldn't mind if you kind of tried to push that over a little bit." Right? So we're like, all right, cool. We'll take a look at that system. So we use it as a training engagement, usually for like a week, with their blue team and or red team if they have one, giving them other ways to think about the network and lock things down. And if we find something mission critical, we stop and we work with them to fix whatever it is. We find another hacking team in there, which we have, or we'll find.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've definitely found indicators of compromise, IOCs, for other teams in there, and that's an all engagement stop, and we call in everybody.
And when you say other teams, you mean bad guys at that point.
Yeah, and we'll my team will go into forensics mode. We'll track them down, and we'll be like, all right, here's where they came in, here's who they are, here's right. Especially if the customer doesn't have a threat hunting team, so that's typically what we do, and then the report we deliver to them is very actionable. It's here was the issue we found, here's the risk, here's what could happen, here's how you fix it, and here's how you run the commands yourself that we ran to exploit it. So until these come back clean, there's no need to check back in or anything like that. Just go through. So we want them to have all the tools, and we even tell customers after being with us for a year or two, like, go find another security vendor. Like, it behooves you. Like, we look at it one way, and we start to get tunnel vision when we hit this network over and over again. Go find somebody else who's going to look at it in a different way, right? So that's how we approach it. So what they get from us is training, a report that gives them some actionable intel and how they can test their own network, and then advice that they can hopefully learn, and we'll adopt more customers.
Oh, I like
That's
that.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm curious to know if you've ever had a situation where, like, you've got the blue team there and they get like angry because it's like, it's like, crap!
Okay. Yeah, so we've had situations where we've had developers of applications on the line where we just tear the application apart, and they're very much like, oh man, like, and we tell them that, like, they're like, what the F, and I should have been better at this, and I'm like, listen, like, I've been a developer actually since the early 90s, mid 90s, and a cybersecurity focus since 2000. So. And there are a lot of these things I miss, and I'm solely focused on cyber. So don't beat yourself up. This is what we do, right? We specialize in these things. And I like that type of mentality because that person wants to be better. We did have one blue teamer on it was a massive Fortune 500 company. And he was the network security guy. And he was on the call, and every time we run into a finding, we'd be like, "Oh, all of your switches actually are doing TFTP automatically from an IP address that doesn't exist. So we just switched over to that IP address, and now we can feed configurations to all of your switches and that sort of stuff." And he would go, "Well, that was by design. That's like." And we're like, "Oh, okay, that's cool. We're just saying this is," and every single time we would get this, and we finally at one point went through and exploited a particular switch config and was able to pull down all the information on the switch config and decode this guy's password. And we're like, oh, well, the way that we broke the entire network and became domain admin is because this administrator here's his password on the switch, and by the way, it's the same password on the domain. And he was just like, I was like, yeah, we try not to be adversarial, but occasionally we will get someone who We'll
Sometimes they need
invoke the
Yeah.
ire of the red team.
Yeah, your goal is to bring them along with you, like you said, for them to be educated.
Yes.
But as a person who's been on the receiving end of that kind of stuff, sometimes it's hard to
Yes.
to not
Oh,
to not
absolutely.
take it personal, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right, I have one final area, and we've gone a little longer than we typically go, but I have one final area that I want to ask you about, and that is, at its heart, our podcast is about backups.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about backup systems as an attack surface?
So I have a very poignant example. We just recently were doing a pen test 2 weeks ago in an organization where we breached it over the backup system. And so they were all virtualized, of course, and they were backing up all of their VMs. And we got access to the backup manager because the password for the backup manager was weak. It was actually default passwords. Because people think to themselves, it's a backup manager. What do I care, right? What are they going to restore it? And that's what we did. We actually took the backup of the domain controller and pulled it over the internet to us and restored it in my own lab. And then we're able to tear it apart, pull every single username and password. So I would be careful. That repository is just as sensitive as your primary network. It's not only your path to recovering from disaster, but from an attacker, I'm always looking for backup systems and what I can pull out of those systems. Right. So it's like pulling that data off. Backup accounts should have strong passwords and should be audited. Backup systems should be audited for who's trying to log in, etc. Backup service accounts that are running on boxes, we've seen far too often just have weak passwords, and it's super easy for us to then compromise. And the thing about backup is awesome, actually. The backup service right on Windows gives you the ability to read any file without being audited. Yep. So you have all these auditing tools looking for users like reading files and opening secure files and whatever. But if you can request the SE backup right, you can touch anything and nobody ever sees it. So from a surface of attack standpoint, like backups are like a win button for us. We're always looking for like, hey, do they have a backup system? Is there an account we can compromise that has SE backup rights? Because if so, money, we can go open any file we want and nobody will know we were there. So yeah, I would absolutely say surface of attack is large there. And you really need to go back to basics, make sure good passwords, strong auditing on backup systems, and don't just think it's your path for recovery. It could also be an attack target.
That's crazy. I did not know that about the Windows role.
It's so cool. So many cool things you could do. Privilege escalation for ransomware can be done through backups. I mean, there's so many cool things.
Okay, I was excited, and then I just got really depressed right at the end there. I was like, God, it could be used for the thing that we try to tell. Like I've been trying to, this is going to sound really weird, especially given that you joined you crossed over into cybersecurity in 2000. What I think we're having at this point is a 9/11 moment, and here's what I mean by that. Up until 9/11, the thinking was, just like don't do anything crazy with the hijackers. Okay, they can have access to the thing, but what are they going to do? Right? They're going to want to land the plane. They're going to want to hold everybody hostage so that they can release some prisoners No one had ever said, "Hey, let's go train the hijackers on how to land a 747 so that they're going to use the plane as a bomb, right?
Yes.
As the weapon itself." And that's what's happened with backup in the last, let's say, 5 years, is that the ransomware folks are definitely they have started seeing that two things. One is that if they can take out the backup system, you're more likely to pay the ransom. And two, the backup system is, like you said, this massive attack surface that can be used for exfiltration. I did not actually think until you mentioned, I didn't think about it being used for privilege escalation, which makes it even more depressing. And the thing is that so many times the backup system is administered by the new guy.
Yes.
Right? It's
That
the
was
job,
my
it's
first
the
job. At
first
the
job
company.
I ever
It was
got. Oh, was
backup.
your first
Yeah.
job too?
Yeah, mine too.
Exactly.
And I'll
Right.
date myself. It was these DLT tapes I was pulling out every day and then putting in these
Yeah.
tape backups.
Yeah. Yeah, good time, good times. Well, Dwayne, this has been fascinating. I don't know if I'm going to be able to trim any of this down to our usual show size, so I hope that folks have enjoyed staying with us this amount of time. I want to thank you so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure, honestly. And this was super easy, super comfortable, honestly. Anytime you guys want to talk cyber or latest attacks, just hit me up. I'd love to chat.
All the time. Right, Chrisana? All the time.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. I was like, just hearing the stories you talk about, Dwayne, it's like fascinating. It's like a world that like I've never really been exposed to, and just hearing the stories firsthand. Like Curtis always talks about backup stories, which is great because I've never cut my teeth on backup. But like hearing like the stories or the experiences you have, I think it's eye-opening.
And horrifying. And you notice me, I get giddy when things break.
Yeah.
Like the internet's on fire. I'm the guy going, woohoo! Like, let's see where this goes. Which I know is a little sadistic. I get it. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. So thanks again also to our listeners. We'd be nothing without you.